You can be both stiff and flexible at the same time, and the solution to get rid of stiffness is not stretching. Believe it or not, this problem actually had scientists shocking people with electricity for several hours. Humanely, of course. But before we get to that, you have to know what muscle stiffness even is. Stiffness isn't really about flexibility. It actually has very little to do with how much your muscles and surrounding tissues can actually lengthen. It has more to do with how much your muscles are resisting movement, even though you're supposedly relaxing. My shoulder is very flexible with enough force, but this is about all I can do without help. However, if I use a pole, I can go much further past that initial stiffness. I've never seen myself do this actually. This is that's pretty crazy. So my rotators are very flexible, but they're stiffer towards those end ranges of motion, which is a good thing. That means my arm is not gonna fall off randomly. Probably. This passive stiffness that you don't really have control over is called your resting muscle tone, and it usually increases with a lot of inactivity like sitting, standing, or just age. But that's probably because the older you get, the less you tend to move in general, which of course increases your stiffness. So instead of just being stiff toward the end ranges, you'll be stiff during the entire range. Massage from some sort of therapist, a foam roll, and even static stretching can bring immediate relief to your stiffness. But this fluidity you're feeling is only temporary, and then your cheeks are gonna go right back to being stiff in a few hours or even just a few minutes. But this doesn't mean stretching is useless. In fact, the only reason I'm able to do this is because I've stretched. But since stretching and massage has a temporary but immediate effect on stiffness, it's very, very useful when you get that cramp sometimes. The best way to deal with that is stretching, and yes, that does include period cramps. Now it's time for the shocking study. Get it? Because electricity? No? This study had people sit for 4.5 hours, and what do you know? Everyone's upper and lower backs got stiffer and stiffer as time went on. The lower back in particular got extra stiff. Now imagine what happens to you if you sit for, say, 8 hours a day for a job and you do that for 40 years. The lower back at that point can seem quite literally immovable and stiff. Believe it or not, that stiffness is actually useful for, let's say, lifting heavy weights. But with that lack of movement ability, mobility, you actually lose the ability to effectively rehabilitate, because movement is very, very essential to rehab. Anyway, back to the study. The scientists decided to electrically stimulate the upper backs and the lower backs 17 times, evenly spaced out through the 4.5 hours at the motor threshold for the first group, at the sensory threshold for the second group, and the last group, the poor control group, literally sat for 4.5 hours and did nothing. Imagine being in a study like this and all you do is sit for 4.5 hours to prove that, yep, sitting sucks. And by the way, the motor threshold is enough to make the muscles cramp, and the sensory threshold is just enough that you can barely feel it. First group that had their muscles shocked 17 times throughout the duration of the 4.5 hours had the muscle stiffness in the upper and the lower back almost completely reversed. And for the second group, the one that was shocked only a little bit, nothing happened. Probably due to the sensory threshold being so light that the muscles didn't even contract. And the poor control group just got very bored and very stiff. So what does this mean? Muscle contraction, which is simply just using your muscles, reverses muscle stiffness. And your body knows this because when you get up after sitting and you stretch, you're not just stretching, because your body knows the stretching is a temporary fix. What you're actually doing is contracting your opposite side muscles extremely hard, which is exactly what your body needs to reduce that stiffness in your back. Oh yeah. If you absolutely have to sit for a while, like you work a desk job or you do school, just remember this: motion is lotion. So switch up your posture as often as possible, and if you do have the opportunity to get up and move a lot, do it. There are tons of benefits to movement, like increased blood flow and increased synovial fluid, but the real reason you're doing it is because you want to activate those muscles, which keeps the stiffness at bay. And if you want to live that extreme flexy lifestyle, I actually have programs you can try. And since I'm friends with the best coaches on the internet, you actually get access to their programs as well with no additional charge. So it's definitely worth it. Recap, you can be both stiff and flexible at the same time. Stiffness is not actually bad, and if it's too much, you can actually improve it. Stretching and massage helps with immediate relief from stiffness, which helps with cramps and period cramps, but not chronic stiffness. And flexing your muscles is how you actually reduce stiffness. Man, that was a lot. Stay flexy. Whee! Okay.